So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian with the presentation title, ENDtomology. All right, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Raymond, for the nice introduction. And thanks, Samantha, for stretching the invitation to me. I'm really happy to be here and present today. So this is like a dad joke because my area is entomology, but since the topic is ends of things, I made a dad joke. Not that I'm a dad, hopefully I'm not. So, but yeah. So my presentation is titled Entomology. My name is Brian Blumberg, and I'm a B4 student at the Sanitary Entomology Lab here at Kyushu University. So yeah. So maybe I don't know if everyone here knows what entomology is. I don't know if, do you know what entomology is, or you don't know what entomology is? Does anyone have any idea? No? Yeah? Yeah, basically, yeah, that's a good, yeah, you probably do know that, well, oh, it's already here. Yeah, I think I clicked it on accident. But yeah, entomology, it comes from Greek, and it's pretty much two words. It's the study of, which is ology, and entomon, which is just insects. So why do we study insects? So some people just like insects, I think. Some people don't like insects like me, but there is a reason why we study insects. So, for example, here we have some people who, oh yeah, sorry, forgot to mention, there's like a trigger warning. There's a few pictures of like insects and, yeah, and some other maybe a bit, medical pictures. There's nothing gruesome. I didn't think it was gruesome or anything like that. But yeah, so some people study insects because they're kind of beautiful, or at least for them, they're beautiful. Like they're symmetrical and they have these nice shapes that you can see here on the right. In my particular case, I study this, which is a mosquito. This is actually one I caught. It's one of my own pictures. Yeah, this is a Culex pipiens, and then this is a Aedes nipponicus, which I catch because I regularly go and catch mosquitoes every day, it's just not that fun, but it's kind of like Pokemon where you can catch a different one, and I do want to catch them all because it's just fun having, just seeing as many mosquitoes as possible. This one's actually pretty rare. I've only caught one. It's actually even more rare because it's a male, as you can see from the these hair-like structures. Now, yeah. So, yeah, this is also a male. I think it's quite pretty, and insects are quite symmetrical. So some people study them just because they're beautiful, and this one, I think it's quite impressive myself because it's kind of like gold, and it's got these. It's called. It's a type of mosquito which people refer to as elephant mosquitoes because they're quite big, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But as you may already guess, they're kind of interesting. At least to me, they're kind of interesting. But more than just studying insects because they are beautiful or whatever. Some people study them because they have some sort of impact on our health or our society, and that's what sanitary or medical entomologists do, where we study insects and their relationship to human health and how these insects can affect us. In many cases, it could be just like a mosquito where, yeah, they bite you and they might infect you with some virus or something like that. It could also be, well, I'll give more examples later on. And we also study the methods of how to control these insects, which is really important because I don't know you, but I don't want to die after being bit by a mosquito or something like that. So that's why we are kind of important to society as sanitary entomologists or medical entomologists. So in my talk, it's all right. In my talk, I'm gonna just introduce a lot of context really to why I research what I research, because I think that's what's most interesting. So I think many of you may already, well, you saw it, right? So you probably already know what this is, so you've maybe seen it in the past. And I want to start my talk with talking about the bubonic plague, which was a very big deal in Europe and also actually in China and Asia more recently. However, this bubonic plague thing is actually a disease that's caused by a bacterium called, it's right there, it's in Latin. It's Yersinia pestis. I speak Spanish, so I should be able to read that, but whatever. So the main issue with this is that it's transmitted by a type of insect, and this insect is actually a flea. So maybe many of you have come into contact with a dog or a cat or something like that, and maybe if they're you've you've seen a flea, or maybe you've been in contact with a flea, but you never realized. And that's what happened back then, where people would just, unbeknownst to them, they would come into contact with a flea, get bit, and this flea would be infected with this bacterium, and a few days later they would die, because back then it used to have up to a 90% fatality rate, because it's untreated. You know, back then you didn't really have doctors. This was the closest thing to a doctor, which was a guy with with a mask, with a bronze mask, not a copper mask, with a bronze mask with some, like herbs inside, so he would kind of smell good, because everyone was dying, so it smelled pretty bad. And he had gloves and things like that. But you know, people were dying left and right. This is an actual flea, and this is actually a cat flea. So this one was caused by like rat fleas, because people back then, they didn't love rats, but they just lived with rats all the time. So another example of another insect that we study are these. I don't know if anyone knows what this is. Yeah, it's a tick. Well, yeah, maybe the name's irrelevant. I think it's in Latin. I just put it there for credit, but it is a tick. And actually, this is it's what we call an engorged tick, where they stick to their victim and they start sucking. Like they feed blood, they feed on blood, they suck, and they become like big, and they get this really nasty appearance. And actually, my professor recently discovered a virus that is transmitted by ticks, and someone died from this virus in 2022. Hence why I'm talking about, hence why my presentation has to do with the ends of things, because all of these diseases, they can actually lead to our end. And unfortunately, it happened to a 70-year-old Japanese lady living in Ibaraki Prefecture, where she basically went to the hospital feeling bad, and then doctors discovered that she had like a tick somewhere in her leg, and she died eventually. So it's quite a sad, it's quite a sad thing, but it happens all the time everywhere in the world. Now, this, I think everyone knows what this is. It's a fly. I just mirrored the image because I like making things symmetrical, whatever. But it's one fly, I just mirrored it. And they don't really, some flies may transmit I've never heard of a fly transmitting a virus, but what these flies do is that they go to a victim or whatever, and this victim might have a wound, and they stick to that wound, and they start feeding. Well, they actually don't feed. What they do is they just lay their eggs in that wound, and they lay up to 500 eggs, and in a few days, these eggs, they hatch, and they just eat you alive, because the New World screwworm fly, it likes living tissues. It actually doesn't like rotten tissue. But yeah, it's quite gruesome, I think. And it's actually happening in my home country, because it's in Costa Rica, and recently there's planes that, they are using this technique to control this species of fly, but yeah. Another disease, this one's maybe a bit more unfamiliar. I don't know if anyone knows what this is. It's not a cockroach, but it's actually called a kissing bug. And it's called a kissing bug because it's a type of bug. Well, he doesn't fly, but when you're sleeping, it comes close to your mouth generally, and they bite you in your mouth, and they just suck blood. It's actually quite nasty. And this guy right here, he was one of the first few people to actually write about this insect. And as you can see the quote here, he mentions that he experienced an attack from the great black bug of the Pampas, because he was in South America. And it is most disgusting to feel soft wingless insects about an inch long crawling over one's body. He also describes it as really not inflicting pain, so you would just get bit, and then you would maybe die after. So it's quite, and he actually, there's speculation as to whether Charles Darwin, he died of what it's called as Chagas disease, which is the disease transmitted by these bugs. There's some debate to it, because this guy traveled a lot and he got bit by a lot of things, so he got a lot of problems, but this was maybe one of the causes. So yeah, let's see. And this is a bit more about Chagas disease. So it occurs in two stages. So first, after a few days, you'll kind of get these symptoms, and you'll feel a bit bad, but it does kind of worn off, but it doesn't really worn off. And it might go into the second stage where it develops over many, many years, and that's what maybe led to the death of Charles Darwin. And here you have, unfortunately, a child with a Chagas disease infection, and it's caused by this little well, here it's stained purple, right? But yeah, by this, well, I can't read it. It's in Latin, but you can read it. So, and it's seen in a blood smear, so it's actually like a type of, almost like a parasitic, like, or organism, and it can lead to your death. Now, my area of study is this, which I think is quite cool. I mean, but just because I study it. So this is a mosquito, and in this case, it's an Aedes albopictus, and it's actually feeding on a person. Normally, the people that take these pictures, they voluntarily, they put their arm and they wait, and then they take a picture. I don't do that, but some people do it. And I think this is a great picture because it shows exactly how we get infected from mosquito viruses or diseases. And basically a female mosquito comes and it just bites you and it sucks blood. And when it does that, you also get infected with many, many viruses, as I've listed here, and some other things. But yeah, mainly of this kind of mosquito, which is Aedes aegypti, which transmits, which is basically the bad one. This one's all right, but like it's still bad, but it's all right. But this is the main guy. And as you can see, everyone's pretty much in danger, and it's billions of people that are at risk. In Japan, we have Japanese encephalitis, as the name suggests, right? Japanese, it's Nihonnoen, I think. My pronunciation's bad, but whatever. And it's in Japan, it's in Asia. We have different types of viruses, even in Costa Rica as well, where that's my home country. Come from here. And yeah, now, this is a really cool picture. I mirrored it again. It's not two, it's only one, but I mirrored it. And it's actually a specimen of a 20 million year old mosquito called Culex malariacum, or whatever. I can't pronounce it really. But it was preserved in amber. And it's speculated to be infected with the malaria parasite. And malaria, I think many of you know, it's actually a very big disease that mainly occurs, I think, in African countries. And it's a parasite that, well, when the mosquito bites you, it infects you, and then you basically get sick, and in some cases, you die. So that's a pretty cool example of how these viruses, these bacteria, these diseases that are transmitted by insects are millions of years old, and it's not just a new thing. As you can see here, a more modern example, this is like 20 million years old, but a few hundred years ago, and it's still ongoing, there's this disease called yellow fever, and it basically, once you get it, it's transmitted by a mosquito, you might suffer a viral hemorrhagic like disease, which again is transmitted by this group of mosquitoes called the Aedes mosquitoes, like this one and this one. This one's a different type of mosquito. Oh, I just skipped my slide. But yeah, and it actually in Spanish-speaking countries we call it it's a muerte de Aurelio Caballero por el vómito, which is the disease of vomit. So you can just throw up and basically you die. So it's a horrible disease because you basically just end up dying after probably dehydration or something. But it does have many symptoms, not just throwing up. And many of these diseases have those kind of symptoms. Now this, as you may see, it's a young child, it's a baby, and his head is a bit smaller. And this is caused by what we call Zika virus, in where a mosquito bites a pregnant woman, and when she gives birth to a child with malformations in its head. But this might go further to causing problems also in adults, where this is those who are maybe familiar with how, with what, neurons, right? This is a healthy myelin, which is just like kind of like a cord, and then this cord gets damaged, and that prevents these the cord basically from transmitting information from one point to another, and it causes many, many issues. Now, Now, in Japan, as I mentioned before, we have Japanese encephalitis, and there used to be many, many cases, but then eventually we were able to develop a vaccine, and it really stopped all these cases. But again, Japanese encephalitis was equally as bad, and it basically just led to your death. As you can see from this image is an MRI of, it's a brain, right? And this gets this inflammation, and eventually this person died, unfortunately, again, which is really sad. But I mentioned earlier that we can actually control all these infections and diseases. And one way, well, there's many, many ways we can do this, either through genetic modification of organisms or like predatory species, etc. Or my specific research is it's a novel virus that mitigates infections of a specific kind of virus. But there's many, many methods to do so, some which are better than others, of course. One example is this guy right here. He's a mosquito as well, but he actually, his kids, he like gives birth to, well, like he lays eggs, or she lays eggs, and then these eggs then give rise to these which are larvae, and the larvae of this big, really big mosquito, they eat the other smaller larvae from other species, which transmit many diseases. So in a sense, they kind of like control that population. Another example is GMOs, as this company was able to produce a genetic modified mosquito that when it mates with a female, it basically produces offspring that cannot further reproduce, and decreasing the total population, effectively lowering the infection of many of these diseases. In my case, I study the Shinobi tetravirus, which was a virus discovered by my professor, Professor Fujita. And yeah, as you can see from this graph, it not only led to the 90% reduction in the infectious state of mosquito cells, it also delayed an infection of Zika. And it does so kind of there are similar results for other kinds of viruses, which are in the similar group. It's kind of complicated, but it's good at mitigating certain viral diseases. Now, the only problem is that it's really unrelated to anything we've pretty much seen. So there's no information about it. It's actually very limited. It shows a 1/3 identity with its closest, with the closest virus. So now that's a very big problem. But one of the benefits is that when it infects mosquitoes, it doesn't cause it any issues. As you can see on the right here, these are cells that are infected with the virus. And on the left, these are cells that are uninfected. But there's no difference, which means it's a good thing because it doesn't really affect the health of a mosquito, but it mitigates this infectious state, which is a good thing because we don't really want to harm mosquitoes. Well, in theory, you don't want to. Yeah, right? In practice, it's a bit different, but yeah. So I've been studying this virus, and I've managed to catch many mosquitoes around here in Majiku. I've caught thousands, and I've checked the infection for this virus, and I found out there's also, the infection was around 20% last year, but then after winter, the mosquitoes die, and it was reduced to 1%. Strangely, we don't know why, but there's that thing. And also, there's this thing called tissue tropism, where infection might be somewhere in the body of the mosquito. And in this case, it was never infected. It never infected the ovaries, which gives us some clues as to how it is transmitted, or how it may not be transmitted, rather. And yeah, so that was the end. If you have any questions, I don't have a conclusion slide, so just feel free to ask. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. What is the question?
One comment and one question, pretty much.
Yeah.
Is it on?
Oh, it's on.
You gotta press the bottom.
Oh.
You gotta press it. Just press the button.
Right.
Okay, so comment.
Yeah.
I love your approach to Latin names because so in my field, specifically the algae that I use in my study, it's called Karenia mikibotoi, which is still relatively easier to pronounce. But for her research, for example, she probably uses something that's a lot more complicated. So I really like your approach on just not attempting to pronounce it. I love that. Okay, now question actually. How does the viruses, first when you talk about the bubonic plague, it's bacteria exist, but how do they, the mosquitoes specifically, how do they start contracting the virus?
So it's kind of well, thanks for the question first. I think that kind of question is what came first, the egg or the hen?
Okay, so the egg actually came first. If you take all the history, the egg actually came first before the chicken evolved, but yes, go on.
Yeah, so it's really difficult to say exactly where does a virus just emerge. in the specific case of like there is transmission from one species, like from one organism to another, but it's really difficult to tell exactly when was the first infection and how did it evolve. It's just there's pretty no kind of like proof to that, but
it's pretty much just inside the
Yeah,
mosquito
yeah.
body,
Yeah.
and then it just gets transmitted.
yeah, exactly. Either vertically from the mother to the offspring, or from one mosquito to another mosquito in some way, like environmental like causes. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, yes, in the back. Oh, always.
Hi, I have a question. I have a friend whose body never been bitten by mosquitoes. Do you think she has any problem?
Oh, yeah.
She never been bitten
But
by mosquitoes.
Never been bitten by a mosquito.
Have you met anyone like that person?
have I ever like met someone like?
Any individual who's never been bitten by mosquitoes?
And then they get infected, or?
Essentially, they're kind of like not going to be infected.
Yeah, like I mean, it really depends. Like in the case of Zika, right? It's that's not it. That's back. Right. In the case of Zika, it not necessarily do you have to be bit by a mosquito to be infected by a virus, because it's not really the mosquito, it's the virus. Yeah, more. Yeah, here. Right. It's like this baby was not bit by a mosquito inside the womb, right? But it became infected because these diseases, they're caused by a bacteria or they're caused by a virus, and mosquitoes can transmit that disease, so they're called vectors. But really, if I touch cells that are infected with the virus and I touch my eyes, then I will get infected, regardless of whether I was bit by a mosquito or not. But it's a good thing that she was never bit by a mosquito, I think, because it's really annoying. I get bit every day. So.
I have a hard time believing that.
Me either.
I can't believe it. Oh, there. Yep, right? Oh, sorry, yes.
Thanks for the talk. Since you're studying mosquitoes and insects, is there anything special you do to protect yourself?
So I should. Well, that's a good question, right? Like I think I should, and if you go to my lab's webpage, my professor wrote that I like collecting mosquitoes like with shorts and like in sandals, because I think it attracts the mosquitoes if you, I don't know. It's like my thing, right? But you should protect yourself, especially when you handle really dangerous viruses. Now, like from this, not from that, not from this, I don't know what happened here. From this map. So this is an infection rate of a virus that only infects mosquitoes. So I cannot be infected by this virus. They might give me the virus momentarily, but this virus is unable to enter to merge into my genome, and then it cannot replicate. So it just pretty much dies. So this virus is no issue. So I know that I'm safe. However, if I knew that there was some sort of like dangerous virus somewhere here, or like I should wear long sleeve shirt, like long pants or whatever. And I've done, but I'm not really. But I guess I'm a bit reckless. I also went to a place where there's a supposed infection of Japanese encephalitis, and I use short sleeve. But sometimes not all mosquitoes bite you. Some they like different kinds of organisms, am I going back this mosquito, for example, it doesn't really bite humans. So it really depends. It's really up to you. If you have to use your own judgment to make sure that you're safe. I soon have to start manipulating Zika virus, dengue virus, Japanese encephalitis. So obviously then I'll try my best not to get sick, but it's always like a potential hazard, right? So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. On the last slide, I just wanted to wanted to understand what this is about, because you didn't explain it well.
Yeah.
And so, according to this one, the blue and the green is a male,
Yes.
and the red is yellow. Red and yellow is a female.
Yeah.
And what is the SHTV plus and minus.
Yeah, so the virus, well, thanks for the question, President.
Yeah.
The virus is called Shinobi tetravirus. So SHTV just stands for the virus. And now what this map shows is the infection of the virus. And I divided it into two groups.
So you inoculated with some other?
No, I didn't. No, so these are wild caught
Oh,
mosquitoes.
okay.
So I catch them, then I bring them to the lab, and I check one by one whether they're infected or not. And then after hundreds of mosquitoes, you eventually get something like this, right? So I could have merged it, but before we didn't know if only the females were infected or the males, but I just separated it like this. There is some slight differences, but there's really none. I didn't show the data here, but males and females seem to be more or less equally infected. But what this shows is that there's this geographical difference where you might have like 0%, like pretty close to 0% infection. Here there's like a 1% or 2% infection in females, whereas in this shrine there's almost a 20%, 25% or more infection. So there is a reason for that, but we don't really understand it, or at least I don't really understand it.
Yeah, it seems to me that some areas is a little bit more highly, more infected, and some areas not. And I was wondering, is there any kind of environmental and these other factors affecting that infection?
Yeah, so I'm attempting to to answer this question, right? So in the lab, what I did, I tried to, let me just rewind. I'll answer the question from the very start. So there's two ways a mosquito can become infected. There's either, what's called a vertical transmission of a virus, where you have a female mosquito, it lays eggs, and at some point the eggs become infected with a virus, and then the offspring are also infected with the virus. The other option is horizontal transmission of a virus, where, for instance, like in dengue, a mosquito that has the virus bites you, you become infected, then a second mosquito comes, it bites you, that mosquito gets infected, and it's a mosquito that's, they could be related by blood, but most likely they're not. So it's completely unrelated, but it's called horizontal. Now, horizontal transmission is the main reason, it's what you refer to as environmental, transmission. In this case, this is a virus that only infects mosquitoes. So it's very difficult for the virus to be hosted in a human, because it just doesn't replicate in human cells. Now, it could be that the water is infected and maybe they're living, because mosquitoes lay eggs in waters. But when I try to replicate these conditions in the lab, the larvae, the mosquitoes, they were not infected with the virus. I also gave him nectar basically. Well, it's just sugar with water with the virus, and they didn't become infected. So it seems that they don't become infected horizontally, but there's another type of horizontal transmission where a male mosquito is infected, and it's called venereal transmission, and they basically just reproduce with the female, and it passes on the virus that way. And I haven't checked that route, because you need to have infected mosquitoes in the lab, and I don't have infected mosquitoes in the lab because I cannot infect them. So then I have to wait until this infection goes up, and hopefully I can have, when I catch the mosquitoes and I bring them to the lab, I can make a colony of infected mosquitoes and then test that theory. But yeah, it's a bit complicated. I think it might be vertical transmission, but at a very low success rate, where less than 1% of the mosquitoes from an infected female get infected. But thanks for the question.
Good luck. By the way, be careful with dengue. My friend is almost died.
Yeah, it's horrible, I think, to see. So, I'm sad to hear that, but I'll try to take care of myself.
He's okay now.
Oh, okay.
All right, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Everybody give another